Welcome back to the deep dive. If you've ever worked for a large organization, you know the frustration. Someone hands you this beautifully written policy document, and you realize almost immediately that the instructions on the paper have like zero connection to the reality of your Monday morning.
And today, we are diving deep into that specific disconnect. We're looking at policy not as a set of rules, but as an unstable political text.
Using the behavior policies in English secondary schools as our perfect case study.
Our mission is to understand why these texts are never really blueprints for action, and to pinpoint the actors, the teachers, the administrators who have to creatively translate these documents into something that actually works.
And crucially, we're going to explore how this whole process ends up defining the very identities of the teachers and students in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the traditional way we imagine policy working is, well, it's pretty simple, right? Intentions are formed at the top, they get written down, and then people on the ground just execute the plan.
Right, a simple, predictable flow. That idea, what some analysts call the technical-empiricist model, it assumes that language is a totally transparent vehicle.
Okay.
It assumes if you just write clearly enough, the goals will be perfectly communicated.
But the sources we've looked at suggest this is, well, it's just completely false. The moment that document is printed, its meaning becomes unstable. So why isn't the document itself a guaranteed container of meaning?
Because policy documents are not neutral instructions. They are products of political compromise. They're rarely written by one person. I mean, they come out of committees and, conflicting agendas.
Right.
So when they're finally published, they often contain divergent meanings, contradictions, and even what some call structured omissions.
So the meaning can't be guaranteed by checking the author's intent, because the author's intent was already compromised before the ink was even dry.
Exactly. And that implies you can never find the one correct interpretation. The meaning isn't in the text. It's created by the plurality of readers who have to make sense of it in their own world.
So policy analysis has to shift away from finding the original intention and instead look at the different effects the text has on people.
Yes. And that structural instability, those omissions you mentioned, they serve a political function.
Which is what?
Maintaining consent. These texts build these unifying meanings that are politically useful, while at the same time masking the underlying conflicts of interest.
So a policy might try to serve two masters, like high academic standards and student well-being,
Yeah.
and the language has to be vague enough to hold them together, even if they conflict in practice.
That's it. That immediately helps you understand why they are so unusable as simple instruction manuals.
Okay, let's pivot to our case study, because this is where that high-level instability really hits the ground hard. We're looking at English secondary school behavior policies.
Right, and according to our sources, these are currently thoroughly subordinated to one giant pressure: the standards agenda.
The standards agenda, that's the constant political pressure to improve achievement, raise exam results.
Yes, and every local behavior policy has to align with that goal. So the main principle for behavior policy right now has been captured by this term, behavior for learning.
Behavior for learning. So the focus isn't just on making kids polite. It's on ensuring behavior directly leads to higher academic performance.
It's behavior policy as a tool for raising the standards curve.
And that inevitably marginalizes other views, right? Maybe things focused on social development or emotional intelligence, things that don't directly map to a GCSE result.
Precisely. And schools are just inundated with material trying to define what this behavior for learning even means. Our sources describe it as a seething and surging cacophony of discourse.
A flood of government reports, guidance booklets, DVDs, training manuals.
And for-profit consultants. The research cites one very successful training program run by a consultant named Peter Hook, which hundreds of schools use.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The sheer volume becomes a problem in itself. When staff are faced with this massive glut of resources, they just don't have time to study it.
Staff admit they only have time for a very quick scan. They're looking for the fastest way to be compliant. They simply can't absorb everything they're sent.
And on top of that information flood, the legal landscape is changing things too. There's this thing called the juridification of practice. Juridification is a bit of a mouthful. What does that actually mean for a teacher on a Monday morning?
It means they're wielding more legal power, and they're bearing more legal responsibility. An act from 2006 gave head teachers and staff much greater powers to, say, search pupils or use disciplinary action.
But it also means schools are now being drafted into solving major societal issues, things far beyond the classroom.
Such as?
Well, legislative frameworks now require behavior policy to tackle youth crime, substance misuse, issues from the Violent Crime Reduction Act.
So behavior policy isn't just about controlling talking in class anymore. It's about being an arm of social and even quasi-law enforcement policy.
All while keeping your eye on getting those A stars. That's a huge burden of expectation.
It's massive.
So, if the text is unstable and the expectations are overwhelming, what does the policy actually look like at the school level? It's clearly not just one document.
No, it's a messy and complex ensemble. It's made up of fragments, principles, directives, all addressing a huge range of issues. We're talking everything from attendance and uniform to anti-bullying to protocols for knife crime to support plans for looked-after children. It's a vast portfolio.
And since every school has its own unique demographics, resources, history, the national policy has to be creatively adapted.
And that process is best described as translation. A continuous displacement, transformation, and negotiation. It's an inherently creative act of making abstract ideas local and functional.
Let's use a concrete example of this, because this is where the theory gets real. We have a case study school, Campion.
Right.
They were struggling with student attitude problems that were clearly affecting their exam results in the long run. They didn't just follow the government guide.
No, instead of just relying on more disciplinary measures, Campion took up something called Seligman's resiliency curriculum.
Which is?
It's a U.S.-developed psychotherapeutic approach. It focuses on things like persistence and self-talk. The school adopted it not just for student welfare, but with the hope that building long-term emotional resilience would, eventually, boost their exam performance.
That's fascinating. So they found a non-educational therapeutic tool and translated it directly into a mandate for academic success. The school is acting like a policy entrepreneur.
Totally. And that creativity leads to a whole range of local interventions, what the sources call policy tactics.
Things like automated truancy call systems, zero-tolerance policies on holidays, peer mentoring.
And the use of internal exclusion rooms to keep disruptive students in school, but out of the classroom.
It sounds like this forces schools to become masters of bureaucracy. And that brings up this remarkable administrative strategy you mentioned. Double counting, what is that?
Double counting is, it's born out of necessity. It's where a school takes one single action or document and cleverly reconfigures it to satisfy the demands of two completely different policy audiences at the same time.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A mentoring program for vulnerable students. That single program is documented in a way that shows the school is fulfilling the requirements of the Every Child Matters social initiative and simultaneously allows them to report improved attendance rates to the Education Authority. It's a strategic use of language to make the work count twice.
That just reveals the immense amount of invisible work being done by the staff. It's not just about who reads the policy, it's about who is writing it, who's interpreting it, and who is just trying to survive it.
It really is. The research gives us a very helpful typology of the actors involved. At the very top, you have the narrators.
The senior leadership team, the head teachers.
Exactly. They have the crucial role interpretation. They create the institutional narratives, the stories about how the school works. And they use these stories to hold everything together and maintain staff commitment.
And below them, you have the entrepreneurs.
They're the policy advocates, the ones who champion specific ideas, like that resiliency curriculum at Campion. They combine policies, translate abstract ideas into concrete roles, and they really drive change.
But right alongside them, you have the transactors. That sounds like the ultimate administrator.
They are. They're the senior staff preoccupied purely with transaction work, the accounting, the reporting, the data monitoring. They make sure the policy is seen to be done for the external regulators.
And that takes up more and more time.
Increasing amounts of time, yes. It's the tyranny of the quantifiable metric.
But who actually breaks the policy down for the frontline staff?
That would be your translators and enthusiasts. Often lead teachers who really invest in a specific policy, maybe assessment for learning. They're the ones who create the local text, the training materials, the artifacts that make these big ideas meaningful and doable for their colleagues.
Now contrast all of that with the experience of the junior staff.
And that's where you find the receivers. Junior staff, teaching assistants. They experience what the research calls policy dependency. They rely entirely on senior colleagues for guidance.
They see policy as oppressive.
Yes, something enforced or foisted upon them. Their focus is just on day-to-day survival muddling through. They're desperately looking for a simple toolkit to get them through the next lesson.
That sounds exhausting and honestly a recipe for burnout.
It is. And we should also mention the critics. Often union reps, they're the ones monitoring workload and trying to maintain counter discourses.
So they might criticize the system for focusing only on CD borderline students at the expense of the ideal of supporting every child matters.
Exactly. But their critique is often described as marginal and muted.
So regardless of who is feeling the stress, the policy isn't just in manuals, it's conveyed visually all the time.
Absolutely. Policy is constantly reinforced through artifacts and visual cues. Posters in the corridors, rules in student planners, charts in the staff room. These are powerful carriers of discourse.
This is where the policy literally creates the good student. You see posters detailing how to get an A at GCSE with bullet points on study habits.
The policy, through these visuals, defines the ideal student as someone motivated, compliant, and focused on academics. And it extends to appearance, too. Detailed regulation of uniforms, all on display.
The visuals say that following the physical rules is part of achieving the academic results.
And the good school is also defined visually. The school needs to prove it's working.
It does that by creating visual data trails, graphs, charts, notice boards, constantly tracking improvement.
Think back to Campion School. They used a bright red notice board right by the staff room door, counting down the academic weeks remaining until the GCSE exams.
Wow, that is a psychological tool. It relentlessly alerts every parent, teacher, and student that attainment targets are the absolute center of the school's universe.
And that's the final analysis here. Even with all this brilliant, creative, localized translation, the policies all remain fundamentally set within the discursive boundaries of behavior for learning.
So that structure ensures that management tied to academic standards always remains dominant.
Right.
So what we've learned is that policy is not a gap between intention and implementation. It's a sophisticated, messy political process where conflict is managed, contradictions are double counted, and intense creativity is demanded from people just trying to get the job done.
It's far more contested than we ever give it credit for.
Which raises an important question for you to consider. We've shown that policy discourses construct who the good student and the good teacher are, prioritizing metrics and attainment above all else.
So, if policies are fundamentally about power, and the language we use structures reality, what alternative problematizations are possible? What new kinds of student and school might be created if accountability relied on a fundamentally different set of concepts and vocabulary, shifting focus away from the relentless quantification that dominates policy language today?